computer. So cool. So I'll just do kind of a brief intro to let you know. So the purpose of this video is I want to be able to do a couple of things. I want to help people who aren't compliance professionals understand what it is that you as a compliance professional do. Part of that is trying to articulate through anecdotal experience and such, what the value is that you provide to an organization like GitLab, how the work that you do impacts our day-to-day lives, even if maybe we're not aware of it, or even if we are aware of it, trying to change that paradigm of, oh gosh, like compliance is getting in the way, this is slow and arduous, and giving you that platform to talk about how, like, no, like it doesn't have to be this way, and we're actually trying to help find ways to where it's not that way.
Yeah.
It's sort of following that tone is generally trying to educate around how compliance is a mindset. It's not necessarily a skill set, because you might know what compliance is and consists of, but you have to be in that mindset of wanting to be compliant and playing your role, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And then I want to also use this video series as an opportunity to highlight opportunities for the product, maybe the organization, not even product related, but maybe there's some insights here that could help inform decision makers in a valuable or meaningful way.
Yeah.
So with all of that said, for now, what I just want to do is walk through a couple of questions, and it'll be fairly conversational. I don't really have a script for it. I just want to pick your brain and give you that opportunity. Okay. So first, what I would like to just open with is, can you tell me about who you are, what your role is at GitLab, and what that looks like day to day?
Sure. So my name is Jeff Burrows. I'm a security manager for the security compliance team. And what that looks like day to day, so what the security compliance team is focused with primarily is most of the output of what we do is facilitating external audits. That's certainly not everything, but everything tends to revolve around that as a structure in terms of what the output is. So a lot of the day-to-day is we're testing our security controls against a variety of systems. We're looking at changes to the industry to see, are there new compliance requirements that are coming up that are going to impact GitLab that we need to make the organization aware of? Are there updates to existing certifications that we already have that we know we need to start preparing for and getting control tests around, that type of thing. And then maybe the other big piece that we manage is governance. So that's security policies, security standards, kind of facilitating and organizing the documentation that supports the security program to make sure that everybody has what they need in terms of requirements and constraints.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And how long have you been doing this, and how did you get into that space?
Yeah, I come about it very dishonestly. I started my career in accounting and kind of worked through more of the business side of life, I guess. And then it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago that I switched and went into GRC consulting. So that was governance, risk, and compliance. And I was bouncing around to a lot of smaller tech companies, mostly Series B to Series D, and just talking a lot about how to start security programs and how to embed compliance in the programs that they were already building, that type of thing. Yeah, that's my journey.
Cool. Yeah, I think many of us sort of just stumble into compliance as a profession. So I want to go back to, let's see. So you actually kind of answered my next one, so let me skip past that. So I think what would be helpful is for, particularly GitLab team, but also customers, what are the current certifications we're pursuing, if you can disclose that, and then whatever you can disclose, maybe talk a little bit to some of the nuance of each of them, like what you find challenging about one versus the other, and how you're kind of navigating those dynamics.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I feel like security compliance tends to be kind of front-loaded, in my opinion, where it's not a very linear relationship between one headcount for one certification to like 8 headcount with 8 certifications down the road. And by headcount, I mean like people on the team. So I think that, you need a lot of documentation in place before you can start pursuing security certifications. You need to set and establish and communicate your security controls and get a lot of that work done before you're ready to even start the external audit process. So it feels heavy initially without necessarily as much tangible output, and then that kickstarts the program, and then you start pursuing more and more and more. So within that context, what we've done is we've already gone through the SOC 2 Type 1 audit, and so SOC 2 is becoming more of an industry standard as just like a general assessment of the relative maturity of a security program. Not incredibly stringent requirements, doesn't represent everything that we're doing from a perspective of security, but it's a good holistic view of, are you considering these major elements that should be in place with a reasonably secure program? The type 1 specifically is a point-in-time assessment to make sure we have controls. Those controls are designed appropriately to support the system as it currently exists within the scope of GitLab.com as a SaaS application. The next step from a type 1 is a type 2, which we're going to be kicking off the field work for in the next couple of months here. And that's a period of time assessment. So that's going one step further to say, okay, with these controls that are designed effectively to support security within GitLab.com, how do they actually operate over a period of time? There's a long lag between the type 1 and type 2 because the minimum period you can assess is 6 months. And so you need to get everything ready, front load all of your documentation, go through that process, have the snapshot to say, okay, yes, your controls are designed appropriately. And then you're effectively just waiting 6 months while your controls operate as you expect them to, so that at the end of that period, they can go back and retroactively assess, is that happening? So in addition to SOC 2, type 1 and type 2, we are evaluating the business case for FedRAMP. We know that there are a lot of federal customers that ask us about FedRAMP. And so we're putting together the business case because it's such a high cost and unique deployment model. There's a lot of considerations there. So FedRAMP is top of mind right now and something that we're currently evaluating. And then we also expect to start pursuing ISO 27001 in the next 12 to 18 months. And that'll be our next major external audit certification. Beyond that, our intention is to collect a portfolio of certifications so that we'll expand the scope of our SOC 2 audits. We'll go past ISO 27001 and continue on to 27018. We'll evaluate the feasibility of kind of more region-specific security certifications to give customers confidence in those areas. So the intention is to really build a portfolio of different certifications that will give our customers that assurance that we're looking at this through various lenses of scope and severity, and we're really considering our security program very holistically.
Yeah, thanks for that. You said something that I think is really, really important for everyone to understand, which is there's a very deliberate methodology behind choosing what certifications to pursue.
Yeah.
And what I understood from there, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're building the business cases to say, if we have to choose amongst these N number of frameworks, we're going to go with these Y number because these are the ones that are going to best support and our sales teams and our customer success and acquiring but retaining customers while simultaneously proving that we have this strong security posture. Is that right? Is there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think, so we take a very risk-based approach to security compliance here at GitLab. And what I mean by that is everything we do is contextualized within trying to reduce risk to GitLab as an organization within the context of what we're trying to accomplish as a business, right? Because like the best way to reduce risk is to disconnect everything from the internet and have it just sit isolated in a closet somewhere. So it's really, we want to understand what are we trying to accomplish and how within the context of, yes, we want to help the business accomplish those things within the constraints that we have, how can we reduce risk as much as possible to provide that assurance to our customers. The other thing I'll add there is just that we I feel confident in speaking for the rest of the security compliance team in that um, we don't approach security compliance as a way to accomplish security necessarily. We want to be consumers of good security best practices. We don't think compliance equals security. We think compliance enables security to scale really effectively. And so we like to defer to technical experts in terms of what's the best way to implement technical controls to reduce that risk, and how can we bundle that together and present that case to the external auditors that will satisfy our audit needs while working with genuine security best practices.
Yeah, that's a really good way to articulate that, I think. I'd like to explore that just a bit, where you talk about relying on the technical experts, because I think traditionally what you hear is these anecdotes or these stories where a compliance or auditing team comes in and says it has to be done this way, or they try to be prescriptive, whereas it sounds like you're doing the exact opposite. You say, hey, we have these controls we know we need to meet. How do you think we should do that, technical expert?
Yeah.
Do you find that that's been fairly successful so far? And maybe tell me a little bit more about how many people or experts you're working with within GitLab, and how that's panned out so far.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's been very successful. The normal relationship between security compliance and the rest of security tends to be fraught. Certainly not at all organizations, but I would say a majority of organizations that I've personally worked with, because you have people who just are under too much work and they want to prioritize based on impact to the organization. They don't want to prioritize based on impact to an external audit that doesn't necessarily, I don't want to say it doesn't impact them directly, because I think it does, but it's not necessarily articulated to them how it impacts them directly. So those relationships tend to be contentious. And I would say the most contentious relationships in terms of frequency tend to be the rest of technical security, infrastructure, and development teams. And I think what validates the approach we're trying to take here at GitLab is that those are some of our strongest relationships here at GitLab. And so we work very closely with infrastructure, with the rest of the security team, with the development team. And I think they're bought into what we're trying to do, and they're genuinely trying to collaborate with us, meet the spirit of the control, and they proactively engage us, which is not very common, where if they have a new initiative, they'll tag us in that issue and they'll say, hey, I want security compliance to weigh in here. Will this impact some of the other work we're doing? Do we need to consider any additional security controls as part of this? Which just warms my heart every time it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like kind of the Zen state for being in compliance, is when you have non-compliance telling you, hey, should we consider this thing? I think that's perfect.
Yeah. And I think just to add there, I think we've been very deliberate in terms of how we very consistently communicate that message of, we're not doing this for the sake of doing this, right? We're going to put dollars against this to say we have X number of customers coming to us asking us about these certifications, and that validates that it's something that we should be doing as an organization because it supports X dollars in potential revenue. Or, if we do this, we won't have to come ask you for each individual security questionnaire. We can defer to this more standard methodology that will allow us to scale, since we're only going to get more and more of these questionnaires. And I think the other thing we've done that's been really successful in building those relationships is trying to provide data to support, I guess it mostly comes down to resource needs for other teams, right? Like, we want to be continually testing these controls and preparing for external audit. And so we can point to gaps in processes. And so there are times where we'll have multiple observations, which is the output of our testing process, to say, hey, this process isn't working quite the way we intended it to, or I think we've considered this, but like, what about this edge case? We might need to tune this process or this technical control to consider this other scenario. And so as we get more of that data coming out of that process and that program, we can group those observations by team, and then we can go to somebody like infrastructure who is very, very overburdened at GitLab, and we can say, hey, we have all these findings and we need these to be resolved before the audit. this is great data that you can use when you're planning your future hiring and your headcount needs to say, hey, there's all this work coming in. We need additional support. And so we're trying to consider it's not only value to our customers, it's value to our internal stakeholders as well, to say, hey, like, we want to give you the data you need to grow your team appropriately within the context of what we're trying to do as an organization.
Yeah, that's a great added clarification, because I think it speaks inherently to that value that you're adding. So thank you for that. I'd like to get your opinion on, for somebody who's either new to compliance, or maybe it's an internal team member that you want to help them shift their mindset, or it's maybe a seasoned compliance professional who is maybe coming from a different type of environment, and you're trying to educate them on maybe the GitLab way because you find that it works really well. What would you tell to either of these types of people?
I think I would reiterate some of the stuff we've already talked about, right? In terms of that approach, to say the goal isn't necessarily to take evidence that you're familiar with and you're comfortable with and insert that into existing process so that you have something that you're used to present to an auditor. Get yourself outside of that comfort zone and really go down to the core of that particular control and say, what are we trying to accomplish fundamentally, right? Not, well, to satisfy this control, I've seen this type of report before, but really go all the way back and say, what's the control trying to achieve? And have that lower level discussion, which might take a little bit more time up front with those technical counterparts, because then you get those really rich conversations around, like, hey, infrastructure engineer, I'm looking for some kind of firewall report review, right? And that leads to just a back and forth of, why do you need this? When do you need this? And show me the requirement for why you need this. But instead, having a conversation around, hey, the spirit of this control is really around, we want to make sure that we're not just setting these firewall rules and never considering whether or not they should be expiring, whether or not they were needed 3 years ago and they're no longer relevant. So we want to prove to an auditor that we holistically consider our firewall reviews, and that can lead to a better conversation around, well, okay, so here's how we approach it. Here's how we automate it. Here's some of the newer technology that might not be as pertinent to what you're talking about. And by having that harder discussion up front, it yields much, much better results, where we can be consumers of what they're already doing, and we're educating ourselves so that we can have those conversations with the auditors and say, okay, you might be used to seeing this type of review evidence, but instead let's talk about how our technology is set up, and let me show you some configurations of the automation instead. And it accomplishes the same result, but in my opinion, a much more scalable way. So I guess what I would say to them is just, like, don't go to the, here's what I want from you. Go one level deeper to say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. How would you like to accomplish that within the context of this technology?
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that. So maybe moving towards some of the potential, like, product insight part of the conversation, I'd be curious to understand from you, let's just say one thing. What is one thing that no application does well when it comes to compliance? And it's a bit open-ended for you. So maybe that's in terms of compliance management. Maybe that's being compliance friendly in terms of the application has features to support a good compliance posture. But what's that one thing that you think nobody does well right now?
This is a harder question for me, just because after moving into management, I find myself working less on the day-to-day stuff. I think maybe one thing is, from my perspective, it seems like my team spends a non-trivial amount of time validating the completeness and accuracy of data. And so considering not just what the output is, but how the output was generated, I think is maybe one of the biggest things. Because often when we look at a report, we want to know, how was that report pulled? How can we be sure that that represents all of the data that we're interested in? When was the report pulled? And just kind of that chain of custody, maybe for getting to that export of evidence. Was that helpful? Did that answer your
Yeah.
question?
I mean, that's, from your perspective, that's all that matters. That's a good answer. So I know we're coming up on time here, so I want to ask maybe just one question that's maybe a little bit more, even more so open-ended, and hopefully a little bit more fun for you. Um, but in your line of work and in your experience, if you could tell kind of a broader audience, let's just say it's the team members at GitLab, if you could tell them one thing you wish they knew about your job in compliance, what would that be? And why do you feel it's important for them to know that?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't. It's a really good question. I think I would try and explain where I see that we fit in kind of the ecosystem of business and security within GitLab. And so I do think that we're trying to overcome a lot of stigma around checkboxy compliance people and unnecessary requirements that aren't as applicable. And so I think I would want to convey that we're serious about being consumers of genuine best practices, and we're flexible. But I would want them to know that anytime we fundamentally change how the product works, or how information flows between systems, that's the right point to engage security compliance, because we want to be in on those decisions, because ultimately our goal is to be a buffer between technical experts doing what they know and love and external auditors. And we want to be that translator service, because I think a success for our team is that we're reducing as much as possible the burden of an audit period. I mean, my dream state, I think, would be that we achieve an external audit without some people realizing that we're going through an external audit, right? Because that means we've done our job of testing things beforehand, collecting the evidence that we know we're going to need, and understanding the systems to the point where the auditor doesn't need to hit the edge of our knowledge and go beyond and engage with those technical experts.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I think that you again touch on a really important facet there, which is, we're trying to reduce that kind of like, oh crap moment at the end where it might seem burdensome and it might seem checkboxy or, these things early on, but it's much better to have that minor inconvenience every so often versus that last mile stretch at the very end where everyone's cramming and stressed and trying to deal with this now suddenly large burden at the end. So thanks so much for articulating that.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think maybe just one final thought is, one thing I found really challenging is, what's the right level of information to provide to people to support the requests we're making of them. We don't want to go all the way down and say, here are the individual regulatory or compliance framework requirements, and this is why we're asking you for this, because then you're making them experts at our job instead of synthesizing that information and packaging it. But at the same time, you don't want to be too broad to say, just trust us, we know what we're doing, give us this, and this is what we need. And so trying to find that sweet spot of, here's our request, here's how this request supports these controls and these requirements if you're interested, but abstracting that to a point where it's comprehensible and not burdensome, I think is something that we've definitely struggled with. So.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense to me, and hopefully this conversation will be helpful for non-compliance and compliance alike to see how we've had some successes and shared in some of the struggles, and hopefully make for a much better experience overall for everyone. But Jeff, thanks so much. This was really great. I enjoyed this format. I hope you did too. Any kind of final thoughts or maybe advice for the next one?
No, I think this is great. I love that you're out there advocating and collecting this stuff. So no, this was fun. Thanks for organizing.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, Matt.